me know when you're ready. Emerald is managing the AV from Wikimedia headquarters. She's Chandra Wiseman. Okay, we're live? Is that correct? Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody out there in Wiki Research land. This is Jonathan Morgan from the Wikimedia Research team. Welcome to the December 2019 Research Showcase. Today we have two speakers, Fabian Suchanek from the Institut Polytechnique de Paris. Oh gosh, I really need to pronounce things ahead of time. Is going to be speaking on making knowledge bases more complete. Fabian, do you want to just say the name of your institution in a way? Okay.
The Télécom Paris is the name of the university, and we are part of a bigger thing, which is Institut Polytechnique de Paris.
Okay, thank you. So that people who can't understand my American accent at least know where you're coming from. Also on the line, and he'll be back soon, is Brian Keegan from the University of Colorado Boulder. And he's going to be, and he's back. And he's going to be presenting on the dynamics of peer-produced political information during the 2016 US presidential campaign. Before we begin, I wanted to say thanks to everybody who participated in our research survey, research showcase survey. We got a lot of great responses. Sounds like a lot of you have a lot of opinions about the showcase. Most of them are positive opinions about the showcase. Layla and I sat and talked about this for a while and wanted to give you an idea of a couple of the things we're going to be doing in the new year, hopefully making improvements to the showcase. First, we intend to present more themed research showcases. So we'll have more often have showcases where the two presenters are speaking on the same topic. We are also in the new year going to encourage presenters to give slightly shorter presentations because people really reported that the interactivity of the showcase was one of the most valuable things. And lastly, we're going to also work with presenters in the new year to focus on findings and implications, and also potentially bring in a more diverse set of presenters to talk about topics that are related to research but aren't necessarily traditional research papers, although we'll still have plenty of those. So again, thanks everybody for participating in the survey, really appreciate it. And stay tuned in January for a new and hopefully slightly improved research showcase. Okay, I think that's all of the administrative trivia that we have to do. So Fabian, I will hand it over to you for your presentation whenever you're ready.
Cool, good. Let me share my screen. Does that work? Can you see it?
Yep, we can see it. It looks perfect.
Okay, cool. Good. Yeah, thanks for joining my talk. My name is Fabian, and I'm going to talk about making knowledge bases complete. So I'm going to share some personal details with you because I'm a big fan of Elvis Presley. I hope you know, it's a very important singer. And we actually went to visit him last year in New Zealand. So here is his lodge in New Zealand. It was very nice. So we met with Elvis, and I said, I'm a great fan of you, and I have all your CDs, and it's like really nice on your albums. And we talked a bit, and Elvis has retired from public life. Like, he hasn't given any more concerts or any more recent albums, so he has retired from public life. But he is very interested in technology. And he was very proud. He showed me on his phone, he can ask, like with Siri, when was Elvis born? And gives a result, 1935. I said, super cool, Elvis is super happy. And I said, yeah, so behind that, Elvis is a knowledge base. So Siri knows things about people of public interest. Great. And where else are knowledge bases used? Well, they are used, for example, in Amazon Echo. So if you ask Amazon, what is the capital of New Zealand? It will answer Wellington. And what powers this is a knowledge base. And then knowledge bases also power IBM Watson, and IBM Watson has discovered some proteins that relate to cancer. And knowledge bases are also used in the Microsoft academic search, or in general at Microsoft. eBay builds a knowledge graph, and eBay has a shop bot where you can buy things, and all these applications are powered by knowledge bases. Oh, and Elvis said this is very interesting. So many applications for knowledge bases. So what's more? So okay, one more is Google. So if you search for yourself on Google, Elvis Presley, then Google replies to you not with a set of pages, but actually also with knowledge about you, about Elvis, right? For example, that you are available on these channels, and that you were born there, and that you were a rock and roll singer. And Elvis said, "This is super, this is great." But why does Google say that I died in 1977? Yeah, so this is not so nice. Yeah, so you imagine Elvis searches for himself, and he finds he died. Yeah, it's really annoying. And so I said, okay, Elvis, so let me explain this to you. But we need to have a bit more details here, and I will explain to you how knowledge bases work. And what I explained to him is what I will explain to you now. So what is a knowledge base? A knowledge base can be seen as a graph where the nodes are entities, such as Elvis or 1935, or classes such as singer and person, and the links are relationships between these entities. For example, Elvis was born in 1935. And so these knowledge graphs find plenty of applications, as we've seen in chatbots and in machine translation and in entity recognition. And we are going to talk about two topics today. One is the construction of these knowledge bases, and one is the completion of these knowledge bases. So let's start with the construction. How can we get such knowledge graphs? So we had this idea like 10 years ago to build up such knowledge graphs automatically from Wikipedia. So what happens is we take a single page from Wikipedia, for example, about a random American singer, and we're going to make each page into one node. So the page about Elvis Presley is going to become one node, Elvis Presley, in our graph. And then we're going to look into the info boxes on the right, like he was born that year in that place. And we extract information about the birth year and the birthplace from these info boxes. And we do the same with the categories at the bottom. So, for example, we figure out that he is an American singer. And then we're going to add this information to our graph. And so in this way, we can construct automatically a knowledge base from the information on Wikipedia. And we have an example here. This is what this knowledge base that we constructed knows about Elvis. So we know, for example, that he is married to Priscilla, and that he influenced this particular person, that he acted in these movies, that created this, album, and that he has won this award, and all these types of things. And the little flags tell us from which language of Wikipedia we extracted this, but we built it all together into one big knowledge graph. And so this is this project. It's called YAGO, yet another great ontology, and it is a large knowledge base that we built from Wikipedia, from WordNet, and from many other sources. And the particularity is that we have time and space information. We have 10 different languages. We have 100 relationships. We have 100 million facts, that is links between the entities. And we have 10 million entities. We are particularly proud that we have a 95% accuracy. That is, the extraction mechanisms that we use, they are so fine-tuned that they extract at a very high accuracy from the source. So it's very rare that we extract facts that are wrong with respect to Wikipedia. And this knowledge base is used in DBpedia and also in IBM Watson. And the data and the code is available online for free. And this is joint work with people from the Max Planck Institute and from my current institute, and we have won a number of awards. So as an exclusive news, I'm going to show you a preview of the new version of YAGO that we're currently preparing. It's not yet out, but I showed you. So we are building YAGO 4, which is the 4th version, and we call that a reasonable knowledge base. Why reasonable? Because one will be able to reason on it with an old reasoner, for example. So what do? We no longer feed from Wikipedia because Wikidata has long surpassed Wikipedia in terms of structured data. And we combine the information about instances from Wikidata with the taxonomy, the ontology, and the relations from schema.org, which is a standard. And we add in semantic constraints. So what this gives is, here in the preview, is, for example, that we know that Paris is a capital city, every capital city is a city, and every city is an administrative area, which is a place, which is a thing. So we get a very neat and small taxonomy, and this taxonomy comes with constraints. For example, we know that places are disjoint from people, and that people must have a birth date, and they can have at most one birth date, and so on. So it is possible to, this knowledge base is so clean because of these constraints that it is possible to load this into a reasoner and actually deduce things from it. But this is a preview. So this is the first part of this new knowledge base. This is the construction of knowledge bases. And now I'm going to come to the main part of this talk, and I'm going to talk about how we can complete knowledge bases. That is, if the data is not complete, how can we find where it is missing, and how can we add what is missing? So this happens on several levels. The first one is incompleteness with respect to concrete facts. So knowledge bases are always incomplete because they are so big, and so there's always something missing. And what we would like to do is to deduce, for example, that if somebody is married to somebody else, Elvis is married to Priscilla, and if Elvis is the father of Lisa, then most likely Priscilla is also going to be the mother of Lisa. So we want to automatically find rules such as if X is married to Y and X has child Z, then most likely Y also has child Z. And if we can mine such rules automatically, then we can deduce missing facts. We can, for example, find out that the mother of Lisa is most likely Priscilla. So these rules do not always hold. In particular, this rule holds only in 80% of the cases in YAGO. And the reason is that we feed from Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has as entities all characters of the American soap operas. And these people are never married to the parents of their children. That's the entire point of a soap opera. And so this is why we have a precision of only 80% for these rules. So the goal is finding such rules automatically. And there are two difficulties. The first one is that knowledge bases do not have negative information. So there are only positive data points in the knowledge base. And so the problem is that if you want to generalize from only positive examples, you can generalize everything. Example is Woody Allen, who was married to his stepdaughter. Very weird constellation. Suppose you find 5 more people who are married to their stepdaughter, then you have nobody who tells you that Elvis was not married to his stepdaughter, right? And then you will just deduce everybody's married to their stepdaughter. So we found a solution to this problem, which we call the partial completeness assumption. And this works as follows. We're going to say that if Elvis has a child, then we assume, and if he has a child in the knowledge base, we assume he does not have any other children in real life. So in this way, we can generate negative examples, because if ever a rule predicts that Elvis is the father of Einstein, then we say, no, this cannot be the case according to this assumption. Whereas if the rule predicts any children of Lisa, since we don't know any children of Lisa, we do not make any assumption here. And our method can make predictions about children of Lisa, and it can actually add new edges about children of Lisa, because we did not know any children of Lisa. And if this assumption is combined with an efficient in-memory database, then you can mine rules automatically on large knowledge bases. For example, the newest version of AMIE, which is currently under submission, runs on YAGO in just 2 minutes and can find automatically such rules. It cannot find always good rules that always work, but can find very interesting rules. And here's an example. My favorite rule is that if you are a pope, then you will die in Rome. This is a beautiful rule because it concerns a very limited class of people and one single city, and we are able to predict these kinds of things. So that's a neat thing. And this is joint work with people from the Max Planck Institute, and we've also won the Best Hidden Paper Award. Now, this is incompleteness concerning facts. Here is incompleteness concerning the existence of facts. So we pride ourselves of having a great precision of our knowledge base, 95%, and we brag about that wherever we go. But so this means that if we know that Elvis is married to Priscilla, then most likely that is true, right? But what may happen is that there are other people who are married to Elvis and that we don't have. Example. Here is a very compromising picture of Elvis with another woman. And so then the question is, were there other women in Elvis' life? So is there any other object of the relationship married to where the subject is Elvis? Just to be clear about this, there were many other women in Elvis' life, but there was only one to whom he was married. So the problem, given the subject, given a relation such as married to, do we know all objects? And the way we address this problem is that we gather several signals for incompleteness. Several ways. One is the closed word assumption. The closed word assumption just says, don't worry, if the knowledge base contains one wife, there are no others. That's probably what Elvis also told Priscilla. Then there is the partial completeness assumption that we just saw. There is the popularity oracle, which says if the entity has a long Wikipedia article, then probably that entity is complete. People wouldn't write like a 10-page Wikipedia article about Elvis and forget one of his wives. There is the no change oracle, which says that if the number of wives did not change across multiple versions of the knowledge base, then most likely the number of wives is constant and is complete. There's the star pattern oracle, which says that if you have certain relationships, then you are complete on others. For example, if you have the relationship died in place, you must have a died on date. And there's the class oracle, which says if you belong to certain classes, you must have certain relationships. And our idea is now to take ground truth from a crowdsourcing platform, and we ask people, are we complete on the wives of Elvis? And people go on the web, they search, and they tell us, yes, you're complete or you're not. We get this ground truth, we inject a bit of that into our knowledge base. So we say, for example, that Elvis is complete on the number of wives. And then we use AMIE, that is this algorithm, this rule mining algorithm that we saw before, to learn what are the features that make an entity complete. And AMIE doesn't care what she learns. She can learn who is married to whom, but she can also learn who is complete. And AMIE will learn rules such as if you have more than one parent, then you are complete on the has-parent relationship. And this works scarily well. So we ran this on Wikidata and on YAGO, and we can predict actually completeness pretty well on a number of relations. For born in, it is trivial, right? We can't know whether you're complete or born in because either you're born or you're not born. If you're born, you're complete. If you're not born, you're incomplete. But also on died in, so we know whether you're dead or not, which is a good thing to know. We know this mainly from the surrounding classes and the other relations. We know whether you directed a movie. We know whether you're complete on the graduated from relationship. So we know whether there are other universities from which you graduated that are not in the knowledge base. This becomes scary. We know whether you have children that are not declared. And we don't know very well whether you are married or not. Yeah? But so this is interesting technology. So imagine you apply this on a knowledge graph of Facebook or something, right? You could have a pop-up. There is one more girlfriend you didn't tell us about. Yeah? So, these kinds of things. So as always, we can have nice applications and not so nice applications. So this is on the incompleteness of facts. I want to talk about two more types of incompleteness. One is the incompleteness of classes. So, given a class, such as people, we want to find out whether one attribute is obligatory for that class. For example, the attribute of being born, like a birth date, is obligatory for all instances of the class person, whereas the attribute being married to is not obligatory. And so the question is, are all people married? Is being married to an obligatory attribute of the class people person? And you may think it's not so important. And for Elvis and Priscilla, we know they are married, but there are entire generations of people who care about whether this person is married. Yeah? So there is some importance. And so this is not trivial at all, because what we have in the knowledge base is just an image of the real world. So in the real world, you have like the green dots that are married people and the red dots are not married people. And like our goal is to determine, are all people married? Well, obviously not, but in the knowledge base, we don't have the red, in the knowledge base, we don't have the red dots because we store only positive information. And we don't even have all the green dots because we're incomplete. And now you have this picture of different classes, class of people, you have the subclass of women, and you have the subclass of consorts, these legal royal consorts, and you want to know, is being married to an obligatory attribute for women, for consorts, where it is, or for people? Is it not trivial? And so we have a very interesting theorem that says that if the knowledge base is sampled randomly, uniformly from the real world, I love theorems because they always start with if false. The knowledge base is never randomly sampled from the real world, but if it were, and if the density of an attribute changes when we go into an intersecting class, then the attribute cannot be obligatory. So what this means is that if you look at the class of women and you check how many green dots there are, and you go into an intersecting, well, it doesn't really matter. You go into an intersecting class, namely the one the intersection was consorts, then the density increases. We have more green dots in this intersection. And this means that in the real world, not all women can be married. And with this trick, we can actually figure out which attributes are obligatory and which ones are not, with a very high precision. So this is work that talks always about facts and talks about attributes. I now want to talk in the last 2 minutes that I have about the completeness of entities. So suppose I'm a French researcher and I make a knowledge base of all important cities in the world. Here I make a city, for example, Paris, Lille, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, and New York. And I ask, are these all important cities, or are there some cities that are missing? Right? So how can we know whether we are complete on the entities? And this is very tough. And there is a trick how we can actually figure out whether we are missing entities. And this trick goes as follows. You take the number of inhabitants of each city. Now you have this in YAGO or Wikipedia, you have this. You take the first digit of that number. So Paris has 13 million inhabitants, you take the number 1. New York has 8 million inhabitants, you take the number 8. And you plot a histogram of how often these numbers appear. This is shown in the plot. And then there is a very weird law. And this law says that this distribution of the first digits should follow this distribution that is given there in the formula that's shown in the blue line. And that's super surprising and super weird. So it says that the first digit, number 1, should appear roughly in 30% of the cases. And the first digit 2 should appear in roughly 20% of the cases. And if it doesn't appear in this frequency, then we know there are cities missing. And now you say, wait, that's super weird. Why would the digit number 1 appear more frequently in any way than the digit number 2, right? Because this is just the first digit of the population, and it doesn't even have to be in the millions, it can be in the hundreds or the thousands. Why would the 1 be more important? And the reason is this Benford's law, which says that any quantities that grow exponentially, such as cities, they grow by, say, 3%, When you do the math, you take like a city that has 1,000 inhabitants, and they grow by 50% each year. Let's just assume, right? Then you pass more often through the digit number 1. Try this. You have 1,000. Next year, you have 1,500. You pass again through the 1. Next year, you have 2,300. You have the 2. Then you have 3,800. You have the 3. But you saw the 2 only once. The 3 you're going to see only once. You add again 50%. You're going to be like at, I don't know, 5,000. You skip the 4. You add again 50%. You're at 7,000. You add again 50%. You're again at like 1,000. Like 10,000, and then the numbers repeat. You see, if you repeat this, you see that you really pass more often through the digit number 1. And based on this, we can deduce how many cities are missing in our knowledge base. Sure. And Elvis said that this is amazing. This is very interesting what you're doing with the knowledge base, but you have not explained to me why Google says I'm dead. So yeah, this is true. And I looked this up in YAGO, and to my great shame, YAGO also says that Elvis died. Yeah? And I said, look, Elvis, I'm very sorry about this, but if YAGO has 100 million statements and has an accuracy of 95%, then this means there are still 5 million wrong statements. And maybe this is one of them. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Fabian. I'm not sure how we're going to break it to Elvis that he's dead, but it seems as though he should trust the knowledge base. We have time for some questions. I wanted to first call out that we have several members of the research team in the call today. We have Diego Saez-Tromper, we have Joel DeFala, we have Isaac Johnson, and we have Martin Gerlach. So they may be participating. Isaac is on the Q&A. Any questions from IRC or from the YouTube stream, Isaac?
No, nothing yet from IRC or YouTube.
I'm trying to quit this full screen mode, so this is what I'm going to be doing.
Okay, cool. We need your ears, not your eyes, for questions. I had a question. So I think one of the interesting things about this presentation, one of the things I took away is that, there are different ways to be wrong for a knowledge base to have either incorrect or incomplete relationships between entities.
Right.
And that relationships that are, that are declared or inferred from different sources are often kind of wrong or incomplete for different reasons, right? So you might have a missing relationship because, that relationship wasn't attested in the corpus that you consumed into the knowledge base, or you might have an algorithm that inferences inferences about relationships, and sometimes it's wrong. Or you might have crowd workers validating those inferences, and they might be wrong too,
right?
Even if they're right most of the time. So I'm wondering if when you preserve, when you have represent relationships in the knowledge base, do you preserve metadata about basically the provenance of that relationship, right? Whether it comes from an external corpus, whether it was kind of directly inferred by an algorithm, or whether it was maybe inferred by an algorithm and then validated by a person. It seems like that might be metadata that I, as an end user, would want to have.
Absolutely. So we do have the metadata. We know when, from where, and with which technique we extract that fact. We have for each fact also an estimation of its correctness, like the correctness, which we determine by a manual evaluation. So we actually know to what degree a fact is true. It's even really a probability. So if you take 100 facts, then you're going to have like exactly 95. I mean, more or less 95 of these facts are going to be correct and 5 are going to be wrong. And we even have a system that allows us to trace how a single fact went through the entire machinery, from the extraction, through the verification of the constraints, through the duplication, through the normalization, until the final end. And so we know how a fact came there. Or if you want to trace a fact that died, we know where it died and why it died. So provenance is very important to us, yes.
Cool. By the way, try clicking on the presenting front just to make sure we can hand off to Brian in a minute. Try presenting or clicking on this stop sharing. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, we're back. Anybody have any other questions for Fabian?
I wanted to ask how, I don't know if you're doing this largely in English, but when you if you were to run this over multiple languages and you run into differences essentially in what the knowledge base, the facts that come through, how you handle those sort of differences across languages.
Right. So we do run this across 10 different languages of Wikipedia, and we actually manually checked whether they diverge. And of course, they do diverge, but we are not interested in the full text. We are interested in things like birthdays of people and locations of institutions and alma maters of people. So we manually evaluated on these, and we found a divergence in just 5% of the cases. Which is surprisingly little, but then it's also like uncontroversial things, like whether somebody is born in a place or not born in a place. This is usually not things that people just like have disputes about. I mean, I don't know, Wikipedia might know more, right? But this, I imagine there's more potential for conflict in the text than in these info boxes, first thing. And second, the conflicts that we found were mostly like interpretations. For example, there is the height of the Eiffel Tower, and it is either with or without the antenna. You see, that's not really conflict, is mainly a matter of interpreting this fact. And so it was too few conflicts for us to really bother about it, because as soon as we are below 5%, then we hit our target. Yeah. But it's an interesting question, yeah.
Fabian, this is Brian. I had a question. Like, I've always been interested, as you're going to see my presentation, I'm really interested in like how people collaborate rapidly. And so in something like Wikidata, when like something like the Cathedral Notre Dame like burned down, like how long does it take for that kind of knowledge linkages and to sort of be updated and revised in something like Wikidata, and like for all those revisions or for those to then propagate out the knowledge through the knowledge graph?
Right. So the current YAGO gets updated very rarely. It's only once a year. And the reason is that with each update, we do a manual evaluation of the extraction quality. And since we are a public university and we have limited funding, we do this only once a year because we mainly have to get our PhDs to get this right, to do that right. So this is why the current YAGO has a very slow update cycle. The new YAGO that is based on Wikidata and schema.org and bioschemas.org can have faster update cycles because there will be the main difficulty will be the constraint checking, and this is done automatically, so we can have running it more often.
So yeah, in the United States, we've got our impeachment vote for President Trump this evening. And so obviously it's going to go to a trial in the Senate, but in a possible future where President Trump is no longer president, that sort of knowledge claim would need to be updated. And so like how, like when you have like major changes like that, like how do you sort of think about like updating all these knowledge bases to reflect this kind of new kind of relationship?
If that happens, we're going to update immediately. Don't worry about that. Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fabian.
Thank you.
All right, Brian, are you ready to roll? That was a nice transition, I think, to your work. You're muted at the moment.
All right. Is this going? Should be a big blue screen, right?
Big blue screen. Yep, now we can see your slides.
Super.
All right, take it away.
All right. Well, I want to thank Jonathan for inviting me and for the Wikimedia Foundation in general for just all the support they provide to researchers like me and being able to do this kind of work. For a long, just by way of background, like I've been really interested, my research has really centered on how it is that like peer production platforms, like especially Wikipedia, are able to do the work of covering and revising their knowledge in the aftermath, rapidly revising their knowledge following sorts of current events and breaking news. So obviously, I've focused a lot on like earthquakes and disasters and plane crashes and these kinds of things. But obviously, one setting where knowledge gets changed very rapidly, and there's a lot of activity is around campaigns and elections and politicians. And so, what I wanted to do in this paper was just kind of rewind the clock back to 2016 and really 2015 and look at how it was that Wikipedia covered, the English Wikipedia particularly covered the US presidential campaign over the course of the United States' crazy, insane 2-year-long election campaign cycle. So looking at from 2015 through 2017 and centering on the 2016 election itself. And I want to say right from the start that this is not a paper about election prediction. Like my goal here expressly was not to do, can we use Wikipedia to predict the outcomes of elections? There's a really rich literature around like using Twitter data, other kinds of sources of data that has very different kinds of findings about like how you can use different kinds of online social data to forecast election outcomes. But the general consensus is that like these are subject to huge amounts of biases, and sort of understanding those biases is really hard. And that was the work that I was trying to do here. What I was trying to do, though, was to provide an empirical foundation to something that I think many users of Wikipedia, many researchers of Wikipedia all understand, and certainly sorts of popular accounts of Wikipedia have like knowledge for over 12 years that Wikipedia is this very mutable, customizable knowledge artifacts. And so for politicians who are always trying to spin their stories and you just get power or retain power for a very prominent platform like Wikipedia would seem to be especially susceptible to efforts to influence the content so that it would also influence the voters who would come to Wikipedia to make decisions about how to vote in democracies. And this goes back to 2008, this very famous case that when Sarah Palin, before she was announced as the vice presidential candidate on John McCain's presidential campaign in 2008, in the week and days leading up to that announcement, there was a lot of anomalous activity on her biographical page in Wikipedia when she was really just like this governor of Alaska and not really known for anything else. And so journalists kind of like picked up on this and like saw that there's a lot of really sort of anomalous and kind of like spin-like activity on her Wikipedia biography in advance of her official announcement as a vice presidential candidate. Obviously, the intention here was probably to improve the quality of the article, either based on somewhat inside information, trying to make sure that they were putting the best foot forward. Sarah Palin continued to sort of have this sort of like weird influence over Wikipedia. In the years to come, in 2011, she gave this rambling speech around like Paul Revere and sorts of supporters of Palin then went into the Paul Revere articles and various other articles and tried to introduce this revisionist account of the events. And so again, you have this like example of politicians like influencing through their speech acts, influencing the content that's being produced and consumed on Wikipedia. And so on their own, like these are sorts of like interesting, sorts of like cute little case studies. But like after 2016, I think I sort of became much more interested in how, as Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and other platforms came into the spotlight about how they manage disinformation and content moderation and all these other kinds of maladies around sort of like contemporary information production and consumption. Notably, Wikipedia was not sort of like included alongside them. And this surprised me both as like a researcher of Wikipedia for the last 10 years, but also I think would surprise many people thinking that Wikipedia seemed to be like the first place you'd want to go if you want to try to manipulate things because it's so easy to edit. Again, it's like it's the encyclopedia that anyone can edit. And like Facebook and Google have enormous amounts of resources theoretically that they can use to battle these kinds of things. And so if Facebook and Google and Twitter can be felled by these kinds of disinformation campaigns, surely Wikipedia would have been the first one to fall as well. And yet my sorts of like superficial sort of accounting of this was that Wikipedia seemed to be much more resilient to like these kinds of disinformation efforts that plagued other platforms. And so my goal in this paper is not to sort of explore like how resilient Wikipedia is to disinformation, but is to rather, again, do a kind of down payment, like, well, what was Wikipedia doing over the course of this election when all the other kinds of things are happening? And so, what in Wikipedia was happening with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in particular. So I have this kind of like jarring image I like to use. So the two research questions that I explored in this paper are first, like how did Wikipedia's production and consumption of political information vary over the course of the 2016 US presidential campaign? So this is really a focus on like what the articles, like what was happening to the articles about the candidates, about the campaigns, about the issues around the campaign. And the second research question was like, who are the users? Like who are the Wikipedia editors who are revising information about candidates during these campaigns? So again, we can like leverage the revision histories on Wikipedia to go back and understand both like who are these users and how do the composition of these editors contributing to Wikipedia articles change over time, but also who were these editors in the sense of like what were they editing before and what were they editing afterwards, and how was it that they're participating in these kinds of very salient collaborations about very contemporary and important information? How did that go on to change their behavior? So we're going to explore both of these research questions. And so the data that we're using, again, is like looking at first the biographies. So I'm really just focusing on the two primary presidential candidates in the 2016 US presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton for the Democrats and Donald Trump for the Republicans. And so I'll be looking both at the biographical article for each of these candidates, as well as the related articles. And what I mean by related articles are the set of articles in the category like Hillary Clinton or in the category Donald Trump. And so not only, so there's a category for each of these candidates, and the articles in this category obviously include the biographical article themselves, but also articles about like their books, controversies, depictions, business careers, popular culture, social media, all these kinds of things like that. So again, like there's like subcategories, there's other kinds of pages for both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And so these are the related articles. We've got the biographical article as well as the related articles that include the things like the campaigns as well. So this gave me a set of 1,300 articles for Clinton and about 950 articles for Trump. Again, I identified these articles by category membership. And so for all about 2,400 of these articles, I retrieved the complete revision histories. It's about almost 400,000 revisions for both Clinton and Trump each. So again, for each one of these articles, getting the complete revision histories. Again, this is in late 2017 when I'm retrieving this information. And again, I'm going to focus mostly on this time frame between January 2015 through November 2017. So again, keep in mind that the election happens in November 2016, but because of the insane US political system means that the political campaigns for president really start almost 2 years in advance. And so again, like looking like candidates start making noises about running for president, start making announcements about running for president over 18 months, almost 2 years before the election. So January 2015 is when I'm going to start looking at the data for both of these. So in addition to the revision histories, I'm also going to look at the article page views. Wikipedia, again, like did a major change in its analytics infrastructure and launched the new page views API in July 2015, which is the data that I'm going to use here. So we lose about 2 months of data here between when Clinton and Trump announced in April and June 2015, respectively. So we lose some of the data about the page view reactions to their initial announcements. Importantly, I'm also going to look at the redirects. So like when someone goes to like Donald John Trump, like that page view is logged under that article, but the redirect will send you to like the Donald Trump article. And so like counting redirects as Mako Hill and Aaron Shaw is like really important. So I made sure to acknowledge that. And so we're looking at the redirects and the page views on those redirects as well. And then finally, I identified these 2011 editors who edited the articles about these candidates between January 14 and November 17, 2017. Again, so these are the editors who are making their first contributions to these very salient articles in this very sorts of active period of time for these articles. I went back and for all 2,000 of these editors got their complete contribution history, so I could understand what it was that they were doing before they made their first contributions 2 articles about each of these candidates, as well as their behavior after they started making these contributions. And so, again, over the course of this presidential campaign, there's a lot of events that unfolded. So that Clinton announces her candidacy in April 2015, Trump announces in June 2015. Again, you go forward almost 9 months is when we have like our first primary elections in the United States. In March 2016 is like one big set of primaries, so like a lot of voters deciding which for each party who's going to be the candidate. The Acela primaries are again like the big northeastern states with a lot of population and so a lot of influence. That's in April, and then finally, like Trump and Clinton each get enough votes to secure that their parties' respective nominations in May and June. And finally, the conventions happen when the parties formally nominate each of these candidates. That happens in mid and late July. In late October, there's the October surprise. So this Access Hollywood controversy, when video of Trump making various sorts of compromising comments about women comes out, and it seems that his campaign is about to fail. And then finally, we have Election Day. We have his surprising sort of election result in November. And then finally, the inauguration in January 2017. So I just don't have to memorize these, but there's a few key ones here, like just when the election is, when inauguration is, when the conventions happen, are sort of salient things when people announce their candidacies. So again, we're gonna look first at how did on the biographical articles, how did sort of the production and consumption of information change? So by production, I simply mean how many revisions were made, how much content was produced, and by consumption, I mean how many times was that article accessed. And so here are these 2 plots of Clinton in blue, Trump in red, and their changes over time. The top is the number of revisions to each candidate's biographical article. The bottom is the number of times each candidate's biographical article was accessed. So the number of page views, and I've annotated these with these different events. Again, keep in mind with the page views, this only starts in July 2015, so we lose those events A and B when they announce their candidacies. But again, you see that Wikipedia is very responsive, both in terms of the production of information. So there's a lot of new revisions being introduced to articles in response to major events. Point C is when Trump wins a bunch of these primaries, which surprises everyone, and it seems like all of a sudden this isn't a joke candidacy anymore. All the way up to point J, which is when the election day. Point K is when the inauguration happens. These all correspond to jumps in revision activity, and we see corresponding jumps in page view activity, with jumps in page views on election day. Point J, jumps in page views on inauguration day. Point K, but also jumps in page views on G and H. So G is a Republican nomination. So Trump page view spikes during the GOP nomination. During Hillary Clinton's Democrats nomination convention, that also spikes as well. So we're seeing that these events are driving the production and consumption of information, which isn't surprising, but again, just trying to characterize this. I then extended this analysis and looked again at the related articles. So again, these related articles are the articles in the sort of the broader category membership around these candidates. So again, I've plotted out just for comparison, Clinton and Trump's biographical articles in these solid lines. And these dashed lines are sorts of the behavior of these related articles, so these category membership articles for both Clinton and Trump. And so I've done 5 facets here, and so each of these facets is capturing a different kind of behavior. So how many kinds of new articles were created for each candidate? So so in this upper left one, how many articles were created? What was the creation date of these related articles for each candidate? So we see that Trump had more and more articles created over the course of the campaign than Clinton did. The cumulative number of revisions, again, what's the total number of changes that have been made to each of these candidates' articles over time. And so again, we see that Clinton initially had much more revisions on her articles, and that Trump quickly caught up over the course of the campaign, especially by summer 2015 and certainly until January 2016 when the campaign was really starting. Trump had much more sort of activity on his pages as measured by revisions. Trump also had many more unique editors on his articles than Clinton did. So many more unique editors making changes to his pages, both biographical and related. And then the size or the cumulative number of differences. So there's like a way to measure content changes, like the number of how many bytes changed between every single revision. If you add those all up, that's the cumulative differences in the page content. And so like more content was added to Trump articles than Clinton articles, both biographical and related. And then crucially, page views, that Trump's articles attracted more page views, both biographical and related articles for Trump attracted more page views than Clinton's articles. So again, like by all these 5 different metrics of content production and consumption, and just the ability for like this community, like the Wikipedia community, to come together and make contributions, Trump content was attracting much more interest and activity than Clinton content. And in the discussion, I might all speculate as to some reasons why that might be. For research question 2, I wanted to, again, like understand like who are these editors who are making these changes. And again, when I say who are these editors, I didn't sit down and do the kind of interviews or kind of close readings or ethnographies. This is, again, sorts of very aggregated count, statistical kinds of approaches rather than close interview, qualitative readings. But there's still like some very interesting and salient patterns here. So one thing we can measure, so as Wikipedia researchers, we love our bots. And so this sort of narrative that kind of came out around 2016 about like there being bots, Russian bots, and these kinds of things as bad actors. Well, for the Wikipedia community, bots have always been good things that help us out and do the things that humans don't want to do. So I wanted to measure, again, like how many bots were contributing to each of these candidates' pages and the related pages. And so Trump, over the whole course of, so here our x-axes have changed. We're looking over the whole history from when the articles were created back in 2004 all the way to the present. So the presidential campaign really is A to J here. And I've annotated one other point here in 2011 with this star in the middle there. And there's an interesting thing that happens in 2011 I'll come back to. But again, with the bot editors on top, we see that, again, like Trump's biographical article had much more of the revisions were coming from bots than Clinton's articles. So Clinton had many fewer bots making revisions. Trump had many more. This maybe isn't surprising given that Trump's career up to that point had been as a reality TV host and star, and sort of like this kind of like strange businessman, and whereas Clinton had been sort of like Secretary of State and the senator and these like very serious offices and had much more sorts of control and probably more page protections and things like that kept vandalism out. So if there's more page protection and less vandalism, there's probably fewer bots. That's probably not surprising. But again, like Trump in general had more bot editors. And again, bots aren't necessarily bad, especially Wikipedia, but just there was much more bot activity on Trump's biographical articles than Clinton's. But the reverse holds true for the related articles. Clinton's related articles had much more bot activity than Trump's related articles. Flipping that, like registered editors, again, these editors who like actually create accounts rather than being anonymous IP editors. Clinton, these editors tend to offer like higher quality contributions, not universally, but certainly as a general heuristic. Clinton had more registered editors than Trump. And so here, again, I want to call your attention to the star that happens in the middle in 2011, that there's like this interesting bump up in Trump having more, a greater fraction of the revisions on his article are coming from registered editors. And there's like this kind of anomalous bump up that happens in 2011. So if you go back to 2011, that's when Trump kind of started to engage in birtherism, which is to say that he was questioning sort of the authenticity of President Barack Obama's like birth certificate, whether or not he's an American citizen. And this is really kind of how he entered or came back into sort of American political dialogue, was sort of like this kind of birtherism conspiracy theory he engaged in. And so that begins to be reflected in this Wikipedia activity, that all of a sudden these editors, Trump is starting to get new kinds of editors paying attention to his pages, his biographical page in particular, than before. And this is going to start, we're going to see this unfold over and over again, that there's this distinct change in the composition of Donald Trump's biographical article compositions around 2011. There's a quantitative and qualitative change in like who's editing his article in response to his birtherism. Another work that I did here that built on some work by Samuel Barbosa and his colleagues, where they're trying to do what are called time-aware analyses. So if we bucketed all the editors who made changes to Wikipedia, we split them into cohorts based on the year that they started editing on this particular page. So if you made your first contribution to Hillary Clinton in 2002, you're part of the 2002 cohort. And then we can count how many members of that 2002 cohort continued to edit over time. And so what these charts captures, again, like we've got different colors kind of capture like what fraction of revisions in that year came from members of different cohorts. So if you made your first contribution in 2006 to Hillary Clinton, that 2006 cohort, again, is responsible for, like a large fraction of those revisions. But we see like a large amount of turnover, that the editors who are active in one year stop editing, and like a new cohort of editors comes in, and they're responsible for almost all the editing activity in that year. And then they mostly depart over the course of that year. Then a new set of editors comes in. So we see that pattern hold in general. The one exception, there's really two exceptions to this like massive churn in like editors. The first is that you have these editor cohort come in 2004, and there's one editor in particular, a time waster, who started editing Clinton's article in 2004 and continued to edit her article for the next decade very actively, and was responsible for something like 20% of the revisions on her article. And that's this kind of like big yellow sorts of line that sorts of persists over time. Is really one user, time waster, and there's been there's been a number of different kinds of journalistic accounts like this editor and his sort of commitment to this politician. But we see in general, again, like Hillary Clinton has significant turnover year over year in the number of editors. The same is true for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, like this 2011 cohort, comes in and they continue to also persist. This light green comes in 2011. So these 2011 cohort of editors who kind of come into the Trump article in response to his birtherism continue to persist and be active on his page over time. And then we see another kind of spike of activity, this kind of like light blue, the editors who come in 2015 when he announces his campaign, they remain active over time. But we're still seeing like significant churn and turnover in the composition of the editing pool year over year. And so we can also think about like we've got like Trump editors, we've got Clinton editors, we've got the Clinton-related articles, the Trump-related articles, all of those. So we have these kinds of four different sets of editors. We've got the editors who contribute to Trump, the editors who contribute to Clinton's biography, the editors who contribute to Trump's related articles, the editors who contribute to Clinton's related articles. So we can now look at sorts of the interactions between all these different sets. And these are not disjoint sets. There's certainly overlaps in these sets as well. But I want to like figure out like for these editors in these intersections, the editors who edit both Trump and Trump-related articles, that intersection of editors, what fraction of revisions are they responsible for over time on like the Trump article or the Clinton article and so on. And so that's what each of these lines represents. So again, we're looking from 2004 through 2018, late 2017. And so again, we see like this significant change in 2011 in the composition of Trump-related articles. All of a sudden, like the editors coming in and editing the Trump article starting in 2011. We're getting more and more of those from like Clinton-related articles. We're getting more and more of those from both Trump and Clinton, more and more from both. So we're starting to see like these political editors who had been editing Clinton beforehand, all of a sudden in 2011 are coming in and editing Trump in 2011 in response to the birtherism. Then all over the course of the campaign from A to J, we see like this massive shift in that more and more revisions are coming from like the editors who are editing both Trump and Clinton. So this is in some ways reassuring. Like this is some evidence that there isn't really an echo bubble, a filter bubble happening with Wikipedia editors, and which other research has spoken to as well, that you don't have only people editing Trump but not Clinton, they're only Clinton but not Trump, but there is like substantive like movement of editors between these two sets of articles. And this figure is really just capturing like how the composition of the collaborations around each candidate is like changing as new editors come in from the other side, so to speak. So again, this is just reassuring and showing that like that the number of revisions are from the editors who like edit both, or the different combinations of both these candidates gets stronger, certainly over the course of the campaign. And then finally, we can like measure again these changes in user behavior. Again, I went back and I found 2,000 users who are not bots, who had some minimum level of activity, who made I think like at least 5 revisions to at least one of these candidates' biographical or related articles. And I wanted to look at their contribution history for all time before they made this first edit to one of these political articles, and then like their behavior after they made their first contribution to one of these political articles. And so we could measure the number of days they're active, the number, sort of the entropy, or like the disorder and the kinds of pages, the different kinds of articles they're editing. So like lower numbers mean they're focused on one article, higher numbers mean they're focused on lots of different articles. Latency is like how intensely are they editing, how many minutes go by between, I think in this case it's hours, how many hours go by between their edits, their contributions, how many pages have they created before and after, how many pages did they edit, how many did they touch, did they contribute to, how many namespaces were they active in, like the names, main namespace, talk, admin, files, things like that. How many revisions did they make, and like what was the size of the revisions? And so we can like test these, so we can count these up, the distributions, we can like test did the distribution change. That's an H test, it's non-parametric test of like are the medians different? And so for all these different kinds of measures, we see that after contributing to a candidate-related page, like so once they sort of get involved in editing political topics where they weren't involved in editing political topics, or at least these two politicians' topics before, they are active on more days, they're editing more articles, they're like editing more intensely, so like less time between their edits, they're creating more pages, they're making changes to more pages, they're active in more namespaces, they're making more revisions. And the only thing that we don't see statistically significant differences are like in their revision sizes. So they're not making larger or smaller revisions. So they're making, again, similar size revisions. There's really no difference in that size. And there's a number of reasons why that might be. But we're seeing that this like act of like contributing these like kinds of political collaborations is significantly changing the behavior of users, either in response to their own interests shifting, or in response to the demands of like working on these kinds of collaborations. So just wrapping up here, that political information is driven by major events. Clinton's article was better initially, but Trump's caught up rapidly, and that Trump received significantly more attention over the course of the campaign than Clinton did. And that there's like significant overlaps between the editors who contribute to both these candidates' articles. And there's significant turnover in the editors who are making these changes every year. So we've got new people coming in and like the previous editors leaving. And that making contributions to these kinds of political topics like results in significant changes in editors' behaviors, and they become much more intense. And so it's just some like discussions, like, so if we want to think about like why are people motivated to contribute to Wikipedia, like this work begins to say that like the motivations are not static. So like we want to like understand like why collaborations change or why collaborators change. We need to sort of rethink the way we approach motivation, because that is not static. And this is an important topic too, because Wikipedia is increasingly being used by other platforms for their own content moderation. Like YouTube, like will ingest and serve up Wikipedia content along with like anti-vaccine videos. Facebook will ingest and like use Wikipedia content as a part of their disinformation and fake news efforts as well. So that if these other platforms are all of a sudden like using Wikipedia data around like politically sensitive kinds of topics, Wikipedia is at risk of sort of becoming like, I think Jonathan said it best in another call, like you have this eye of Sauron, and that evil things going on other platforms all of a sudden can get redirected to Wikipedia. And so Wikipedia superficially seemed to be resilient to these 2016 efforts. This paper didn't try to explore that specifically, but are there lessons that we might learn, that other platforms might learn from how Wikipedia approaches content moderation and human in the loop and AI sort of collaboration to combat misinformation on other platforms as well? And one big reason why we might see that Trump had more attention than Clinton did on Wikipedia was that Trump also got more media attention than Clinton in the broader media ecosystem. So Wikipedia aren't biased towards Trump or against Clinton or anything like that. There was just more content about Trump, so there's more stuff for Wikipedians to do. And that's why there was more stuff about Trump than Clinton, both on production and consumption. This is kind of my operating hypothesis right now. And so this is, again, like very simple sort of counting up like very basic kinds of things like that. So there's definitely a need for like closer analysis of the content, the references, looking at the discussions that were happening. This paper doesn't do that, any of that, but I think that's an exciting place to go. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was really exciting. So first, Isaac, any questions from YouTube or IRC?
Nothing from YouTube or IRC for Brian right now.
Next, anything from anyone in the room?
I have a question, but I asked last time too, so I can hold off.
I also have a question, but I also asked last time. So anyone whose name is not Isaac Johnson or Jonathan Morgan, questions? Okay, I think we're on, Isaac. Do you want to take yours first?
Sure. Brian, my question is kind of the results you got. I'm curious to what degree they are linked to this kind of specific controversial political topic where you have a election that people might want to kind of influence public opinion around these people versus just maybe controversial or high interest topics in general. So I'd be curious if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, so again, like I kind of keep coming back to that. I remain surprised that Wikipedia wasn't sort of beset by sort of the disinformation efforts that sort of plague these other kinds of platforms. Not because I think that Wikipedia is intrinsically evil or incapable of doing content moderation, but that it just seemed to be such an obvious low-hanging fruit that like if you're the Russian IRA and you've got $1 million to spend, like why would you spend that on like ads on platforms rather than just like hiring some people like just enter like the shit post on Wikipedia or something like that and keep them distracted and I think there are certainly precedents in Wikipedia's history for like how its content moderation was hijacked. Something like Gamergate comes to mind immediately, but so I don't think Wikipedia is intrinsically more resilient to like these kinds of disinformation efforts than other platforms, but that it just presents a different kind of like a vector of like risks and opportunities. And so I think that the reason we probably didn't see this kind of effort unfolding was that the Twitter, Facebook, YouTube sort of model, like all were sort of like more or less similar in like how you could, in a lot of ways, they were similar in like how you could manipulate the attention on them in ways that like Wikipedia would have been harder to. But I think that going into 2020 and certainly like doing postmortems on the UK election, going into the German election as well, it's important to think about like how disinformation efforts, whether or not they were sort of exploratory or sort of like effective efforts to sort of do that kind of disinformation or influence campaigns on Wikipedia.
Thanks.
So, Brian, I was curious. So some of these kind of, I guess I would call like signatures of pages that are of say the Clinton and Trump pages. So for example, you saw that editing these pages created lift according to a bunch of different metrics for editors. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering for those findings or any of your other findings, do you have an idea of whether this is a general property of kind of articles that are about currently unfolding events? Is it about, or controversial events or controversial topics that are kind of, in the public, that are in the public eye for an extended period of time? Or is there something about this particular campaign or campaigns in general? Like, do you have any kind of postdoc hypotheses about that, the increases in engagement across a bunch of different...
So this is the first time I ran this kind of analysis. Now, again, I would like caution others like not to interpret this as like causal evidence, like sure. Editing, like these kinds of political topics causes people to become more engaged. Like there's like selection effects and all these like sure. reasons why like I wouldn't sort of like call this a causal. But it's my first time doing this kind of analysis where I was looking at these user contributions like before and after a thing and like seeing like how like the user contribution behavior had changed. And so I don't think I was surprised, but I would expect that these kinds of things would probably hold if we looked at like you said, which I think is a really good idea, like the set of like controversial topics, like if we looked at like Israel, Palestine or abortion or climate change and these kinds of like things that you might see editors jumping into like controversial topics for a first time will probably be more engaged than they were before. This is kind of like thrill of the chase kind of thing. And then also the set of like kinds of other breaking contemporary news events. I expect you'd also see that kind of lift in engagement as well. The mechanisms driving that, again, just like to speculate, would probably be, there's something about like the dopamine hit of like getting that kind of like
someone is wrong on the internet.
Someone's wrong on the internet and so getting called out or like participating in a discussion or like seeing like how your contribution is being remixed or reverted and like kind of manning the barricades in response to that.
Right.
I think is probably the most plausible mechanism I could think of. But I think there's also like mechanisms around like just feeling that your work is like valued and like or in like other like a good faith like interpretation, like rather than this kind of like conflict mechanism like that I just described, like sort of like good faith. It's like, oh, it's like other people like what I did. I'm gonna do more of that stuff. So like more like that kind of like this other
The
kind of
camaraderie.
chasing, yeah, the kind of camaraderie rather than the
Yeah.
conflict kind of mechanisms. Like, oh, like people like what I have to do. Like I'm getting more engagement and feedback than I did on like my kind of other backwater stuff that I edit. Like there I might get like 1 or 2 revisions a week or something like that. All of a sudden the stuff that I'm working on is getting like revisions
Sure.
every hour, every minute. And so like that kind of is a very sort of heedful. It's like one word that comes out, like organizational. It's just kind of like just this sort of like very like a flow, just like a kind of like high level of engagement. This kind of like uncanniness. It's like feeling that your work matters is an important, like other people are working in the same way alongside camaraderie, like you said.
That's great. I'm super excited to talk to you more about this. I think there's a lot more we can do here.
We've got a few from YouTube and IRC now.
Oh, now people are interested. Okay,
Yeah.
let's unless anyone has, unless you have to leave, Brian. Let's roll.
No, let's go for it.
A few more minutes.
All right. First one from YouTube, I think is kind of a clarification question, but what does it mean to say that an editor has become more intense after editing on political topics?
So yeah, so when I meant more intense, I meant this in like a very sort of narrow quantitative way, just the way that I measured it but in terms of like how much time goes by between like the like latency is like the time elapsed between each of your edits. So if you're editing every minute versus every hour, like that's one way you can become more intense. If you're active on more days, if you're creating more pages, if you're like editing more pages, if you're making more revisions, if you're making longer revisions, like all these are different ways you could measure like the intensity of someone in a collaboration. Qualitatively, like what you'd really want to do though is to find like, you know, and again, I wasn't looking at discussion in some ways like with the namespaces and revisions, I was capturing a little bit maybe if you're getting involved in discussions. But you know, the intensity could also be like looking at the content of these pages. Like, do you go from like one kind of editing, like copy editing or revision texting or something like that, to like actually authoring new content? So you're engaged in a different kind of contribution behavior than before. That's another way you could sort of like qualitatively think about like measuring intensity that I didn't do. That would be exciting to look at for sure.
Great. I think that probably clarified then and gave me a lot of information, so thank you. Then we have two from IRC. The first is about whether you're aware of any broad or coordinated efforts. This is kind of around the disinformation discussion to edit Wikipedia to advance disinformation and whether like how the community has handled that.
So one thing to keep in mind is that both of these pages were like in various stages of page protection for almost all of their editing history. It's like that is again like a very good like sort of like a first stage of like sort of like filtering out bad stuff. So like you had like random IP editors trying to like introduce just like bad URLs or blank pages, like that really couldn't happen because both these candidates' biographical articles are probably page protected for almost all of the campaign and certainly since. These articles, these biographical articles, are sorts of very unusual compared to most Wikipedia articles, just in terms of many more like there are many more watch lists. There's probably a lot more sort of bots kind of keeping track of things going on there as well. So in general, I think any effort to like make any change in these articles, like good faith or bad faith, was already going to be subjected to a lot of scrutiny. And so my worry, then just getting back to this question, like if there were efforts to sort of do disinformation on Wikipedia, if I was to sort of be consulting like the Russian IRA or other kinds of like state disinformation actors, like my advice would be not to like go for like these big whale, like 800-pound gorilla like articles. It would be like to go to like the related articles and the peripheral articles that are going to have much less kinds of like editorial scrutiny and like be on fewer watch lists and things like that. So I'd say like if you really wanted to do disinformation on Wikipedia, I would stay away from like the highly trafficked articles, and I would go to these peripheral articles, and so that's where I'm interested in exploring going forward. Is like were there efforts to introduce like URLs from like sort of recognized fake news domains, and like were those efforts, or did those URLs stay up longer, or were there more efforts to do that kind of stuff on these core articles or on these peripheral articles?
And maybe related to that, there was another question kind of around topics and whether these editors were primarily focusing on maybe what we think of when we think Clinton and Trump, but, political or election-related articles, or whether they were branching out to other topical areas too.
So we have about 30 seconds for that answer. That's
all right. So topically, what I was able to see was that there were spikes of revision activity that happened on both these articles that weren't tied to exogenous events, like things happening in the real world, so to speak. They were basically just editors coming in and rewriting the article, that just be doing a big style shakedown. It's you would see bursts of editing activity that weren't really tied to major events. It's like that. So I think that's really just an example of one way you could capture this kind of topical editing, really just kind of stylistic standardization, not really being tied to any kind of political or sort of campaign or temporal agenda.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been fascinating. So thanks to Brian Keegan and Fabian Suchanek.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for your talks today, both of you. Thanks to Isaac Johnson for handling Q&A, to Emerald Ross for audio-video support, to Jana Layton for coordination support, and to everybody who watched and listened and asked questions. We will see you in the new year. Have an enjoyable end of December and a great beginning of January, everybody.
All right, thank you. Bye. Are we free to go?
You're free to go as long as you don't immediately go and offer your services to the IRA. That's my one request.
All right.
So Diego is still on the call. Diego and I are going to hopefully talk to you in early January about some of the things that you brought up in your talk. Yeah.
All right. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks.
Yeah, me too. All right.
Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Ciao.